Chairman Wicker for working with me to hold this hearing on combating crime and corruption through increased transparency. From 2012 to 2015, the Azerbaijani government reportedly funneled 2.5 billion euros from 4 UK-based shell companies through an Estonian branch of a Danish bank to bribe European politicians and Azerbaijani elites in a scheme dubbed the Azerbaijani laundromat. According to a report from the Organized Crime and Corruption Project, the money bought silence during a time when the Azerbaijani government, and I quote, threw more than 90 human rights activists, opposition politicians, and journalists into prison on politically motivated charges. The Azerbaijani laundromat is not a unique scheme. In 2015, the Panama Papers exposed what many in the law enforcement and anti-corruption world already knew, that corrupt officials, tax cheats, drug traffickers, terrorists, and criminals from around the world routinely use shell companies to hide assets and obscure illegal activities. Americans' lax corporation laws have made the United States a favorite destination for money laundering. Make no mistake, we are now a facilitator as well as a target in this racket. With every passing day, we learn more about how Russia and Russian kleptocrats exploit opaque business laws to hide the ill-gotten riches, bribe corrupt officials, and undermine the world economy and democratic institutions. Heather Connolly at the Center for Strategic and International Studies wrote in her report, The Kremlin Playbook, that corruption is the, quote, lubricant with which the Russians operate. CSIS warns that to fight the corruption that gives Russia this channel of influence, and I quote them, enhancing transparency and the effectiveness of the Western democratic tools, instruments, and institutions is critical. Russian kleptocrats, foreign drug dealers, and international tax cheats all use the same tool to launder their ill-gotten gains and evade law enforcement, the shell corporation. A shell corporation serves no economic purpose and conducts no real business. Instead, these entities exist to hold legal title to bank accounts, real estate, or other assets, hiding the true owners. America is a haven now for those doing mischief through shell corporations. In fact, starting a shell corporation in this country can be easier than getting a library card. Currently, no state requires the disclosure of beneficial owners, the real human beings who own the companies. Instead, corporate records can identify the owner as just another shell corporation, or a professional agent who was paid to sign the needed forms and never speak of them again, or a lawyer who refuses to disclose the client, citing attorney-client privilege. We have seen over and over how foreign governments and criminal organizations have abused our lax incorporation laws. The Iranian government used a string of generic businesses to obscure its ownership of a Fifth Avenue skyscraper. A Mexican drug cartel used an Oklahoma corporation to launder money through a horse farm. A crime syndicate set up a web of corporations in 8 states as part of a $100 million Medicaid fraud scheme. A human trafficking ring based in Moldova hid its crimes behind anonymous corporations in Kansas, Missouri, and Ohio. Then there are the Panama Papers, over 11 million documents leaked from a Panamanian law firm. They reveal mischief conducted through shell corporations like the 2011 purchase of a $3 million oceanfront condo in Miami by a Brazilian politician facing corruption charges. And in 2015, after a lengthy investigation, the New York Times uncovered that a Russian banker suspected of ties to organized crime purchased a nearly $16 million condo in Manhattan's Time Warner Center. FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, a division of the U.S. Treasury Department, found that 30% of the cash purchases of high-end real estate by shell companies in 6 major cities involved a suspicious buyer, 30%. With so many properties serving essentially as lavish safe deposit boxes, the housing supply tightens, raising costs for American families. The crimes being hidden may be complex and the assets they conceal may be elaborate, but the answer to the problem of shell corporations is simple. Require private corporations to report and update their beneficial ownership information. I've introduced legislation with Senators Grassley and Feinstein that does just that. Senators Rubio and Wyden have also teamed up on related legislation. Transparency into shell corporations is not a novel idea. As we will hear from the panel, every member of the European Union has committed to ensuring such transparency. The United Kingdom has already implemented its own transparency law. The light of transparency is about to shine on criminal assets hidden in European shell companies, which means that lots of money will be looking for new dark homes. We cannot let America become that new dark home for corruption and crime. In the year 1630, John Winthrop told his fellow early settlers that we must always consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us, he said. If we become the new dark home, I fear we will risk losing our place as that city on a hill, as a beacon of justice. In the global battle of ideas, chaining our American reputation to international crime and corruption is a self-inflicted stain that we do not need. So I'm delighted to have this hearing today. I look forward to hearing from our distinguished witnesses, and I'm delighted that Senator Shaheen and Senator Bozeman have joined us. Please proceed, Mr. Davidson. Thank you very much, Senator Cardin. Let me start by asking Ms. Vicini, have you seen any effects? I know that the amendments to the fourth directive only went into effect in June, so it may not be that you've seen any observed consequences, either out of your law enforcement community or anywhere else. Are people actually closing up accounts and fleeing elsewhere? And once they have to disclose, is law enforcement finding new tools that they didn't have? What has been the consequence of the directive, if you can describe any?
No, as you point out yourself, Senator, it's quite early to see if there are any effects from this particular directive. I found, though, that the due diligence that so many of the, not only financial institutions have to do, but also many other areas of the economy, there it has started earlier. Banks and others have started to take it on, and it's become spread. So we see in the network of the Financial Intelligence Unit, the FIU net, they have a secure network where they exchange information on suspicious transaction reports, and there is an enormous amount of reports coming in there. That poses then another problem. How do you handle all these reports, and how much can you follow up, and how, so that you have a law enforcement issue at the other end. But certainly, I mean, this has put the light on this area. So I think there is no economic operator today who is not aware of this, and particularly those who are advising people, tax consultants and lawyers and notaries and banks and those who service companies for trusts, etc. They are very vigilant, and we see that they do their due diligence and sort of bring this information into the system.
Mr. Davidson, could I ask you to speak a little bit more about what you touch on in your testimony, I think in a very eloquent way, which is the damage that America's role in supporting this kleptocratic effort, the damage that does to our standing and to our reputation. You described the frustration of the Ukrainian official who was being lectured at about good government and honesty at the same time that it was Western banks, Western lawyers who were facilitating the thievery and the looting of that country by allowing those individuals to cash their assets overseas, both in terms of enabling foreign corruption, very often enabling great wealth and power to people who are our enemies, and in terms of hypocrisy to our reputation. How does this play into America's soft power around the world?
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously it's not good for our soft power, and I think what we see and what I tried to show with the Ukrainian examples, and I see a lot of young Ukrainians, and they are very, very distraught about all of this. So I think what we need to be concerned about is that this really spreads, that this duplicity becomes a commonplace perception, at which point we are no longer perceived as a place with good governance and something to aspire to, and therefore authoritarianism becomes much more attractive to people in other countries. Now, when I started the Kleptocracy Initiative at Hudson 3.5 years ago, the front was definitely not on our shores. And cut me off, please, if I'm going too far in answering your question, but the front had an ocean between the offices of Hudson Institute and what we were trying to oppose, and then the front moved across the street, basically. So I think in a
Thanks to the actions of the European Union and the United Kingdom in cleaning up their own transparency issues so that criminals jump them to come to the United States.
Yeah. Well, that's part of it, actually. I mean, I was at a conference. There's a yearly conference called Offshore Alert, where all of the cops and the robbers all congregate. But a Swiss lawyer, I don't know if he was Swiss, but a guy with 5 addresses on his card from all over the world got up to be very upset about the fact the business was leaving Switzerland and coming to the United States, and this wasn't good for his particular business in question. But we've become, it's ironic that we have become the leading haven at a time when, in all sorts of other ways, we've been trying to push back against this rise of authoritarianism. But I think we really need to focus. I mean, Americans' soft power is in so much trouble right now that I think we need to focus on this really as a national security threat. It's not about soft power. We need new words for these things because they aren't the same what they were 10 or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
If we look at China, for instance, and what they're doing, or Russia, this isn't soft power, it's something else, and we're not very effective at resisting it.
Moving over to harder power, let's say, if we are enabling kleptocracy and corruption by providing safe haven and refuge for the proceeds of kleptocracy and corruption, what is the relationship between, let's say, in a given country and another continent, a high level of kleptocracy and corruption and security and stability in that country? Is there an established correlation of any kind?
Well, right now, the correlation might be that the kleptocratic authoritarian government, since it doesn't have to deal with any accountability vis-a-vis the people, it can have much more concentrated wealth, not only for itself, but to build up the military. And we see this happening actually in, say, Russia, where there's less and less revenue. Oil prices are down. The sanctions have actually do a lot more damage than some people might think. I mean, why are they so upset about the sanctions? Why are they so upset about Magnitsky? Why do they care? And yet they've been able to divert increasing sums to their military. And the same has been true in a lot of other countries. So
in some cases, it might actually keep the oligarchs more secure. Presumably, in other cases, the wholesale looting of the country creates resentments that eventually create instability. Would that also not be a scenario?
It would be nice if we had more evidence of that.
Last question for Mr. O'Carroll. We've been talking about this at the national and international level. When I announced this bill, I announced it in Rhode Island, and among the folks present were Steve O'Donnell, who was then the superintendent of the Rhode Island State Police, and Hugh Clements, who was then the chief of police, still is the chief of police of our capital city, the city of Providence. And they were there not because they were concerned about these international issues. They were concerned because they kept bumping up in local criminal investigations against shell corporations that were really hard for them to penetrate. So whether they were chasing assets to try to restore stolen money to people or trying to figure out who was behind a drug trafficking network, they were constantly bumping up right in Rhode Island against these schemes. And I'm wondering what your view is from the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association about how prevalent this is as a local problem for local police officers trying to deal with local crimes.
It's a very good question, Senator, because as you're finding out now, the way we're finding it works best with our federal law enforcement is cooperation with local and state law enforcement. So we've been, I guess, trying to increase our resources by partnering with the states and locals. As an example, when I was the Inspector General of Social Security, we worked very closely with the two gentlemen that you spoke about in Rhode Island in terms of disability fraud. Because the locals know what's going on in that community. They know who the bad players are. And what we try to do is by bringing in the federal law enforcement is we've got a little bit more of the global issue on it. We also have got more resources that we can put towards it using the FinCEN and those type of information.
But you see local law enforcement bumping into this problem all the time.
Oh, absolutely.
And needing your help.
And what you're finding, and I think what we've talked about here is that it's so insidious and that every major crime now is somehow being tied in with the money laundering, be it drugs, be it, financial crimes, be it any of the other issues all on local levels that just seem to be, multiplying and getting bigger. So yes, it's at a local level and the federal government's job is to help.
Mr. Coleman, I've called on everybody but you. Do you have anything you'd care to add that I haven't asked or that has been provoked by the hearing? I don't want to leave you silenced here.
Just quickly to follow up on that last point is one of the things that we want to thank you for and encourage you in your bill is that you do make the information available to local law enforcement. There's two, in our minds, critical pieces that are common in both bills that whichever one passes, but we want to make sure stand strong. One is the definition. You have a very strong definition in your bill. You cannot put in a manager or a nominee or any stand-in. That definition
defeats the purpose, doesn't it?
Exactly. If it's, garbage in, garbage out,
Yeah.
so that is critical. And the other is access to the information. And you give access to law enforcement up and down. So international cooperation all the way down to the local level with law enforcement, and you give it to the financial institutions that we ask to help us with anti-money laundering. Those are critical pieces, and we urge you as this process moves forward, please hang tough and keep those provisions strong.
Yeah, we will, and I appreciate it. It was significant to me. I'd been the U.S. Attorney and the Attorney General of my state, and Attorney General in a state where all the criminal jurisdiction resides in the Attorney General. We don't have DAs. So I've got a really good relationship with our law enforcement community, and they were deadly serious about, look, this is not international crime. This is local crime. This is affecting our cases day in and day out right here at home. So I appreciate that.